Okay, looks like we are live again. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another stream. This is Aman Agarwal, CEO of Sanpram Transnational. And in today's live stream, I'm going to talk about how not to manage engineers if you're a non-technical person. Let's say you're an entrepreneur or manager or a product manager, designer, whatever, right? And we'll talk about the concept of influence over technical experts, right? And this is regardless of whether you have authority to manage them or not, right? Let's say you're a product manager, so you don't actually manage the engineers, but you have to influence them. Or it could be you are a manager, let's say you are a CEO of a non-technical CEO, and you have to manage, a team of engineers that you first hired. Let's say you only have one technical co-founder or no technical co-founder, whatever, right? Let's move on. Let's get right to it. So the main concept I'm gonna introduce is called the range of oversight. All right. Hope you can appreciate my beautiful handwriting. So the range of oversight, um, oversight is obviously the key word here, is the spectrum of how much influence you will even have over engineers in general, right? And as you could expect, it's a spectrum. So let's say here's the, you know, one end, and here's the other end. That's a straight line, yeah. Now, now let me mark the two ends, the two opposite extremes of this line, right? On one extreme, which is, you know, the if you have the very little um, oversight, then this is what it looks like. There's a concept of user stories, right? So a lot of times when you describe to an engineer what you want them to build, you will tell, hey, I want an app, and I want the user to be able to create an account. I want a user to be able to like, let's say it's a social media app like Instagram, right? And you say, oh, I want users to be able to have a news feed where they can see their friends' photographs, and I want them to be able to, you know, like things and comment on things, and they need to have a profile. So you basically give them general features, like general user stories is what you call it, right? So user stories. Or you could tell them like, hey, here's an app that I really like. Can you build something exactly same as this, but make a few changes? Like, okay, instead of uh, like along with this feature, they also should have be able to do this or that, right? So you're kind of like a kid in a candy store asking like, oh, I want that chocolate, and I want this candy, and I want this lollipop and whatnot, and that's going to be the buffet of my app, right? So you tell them all the things that you want the users to be able to do. Let's say you work with a designer or UX person or whatever, and that's the extent. Like you give it to the engineers like, hey, here are the user stories, here are the features. Please go out and build this for me, right? And that is, I believe, one extreme, which is the lowest level of influence that you can have while still having some influence, right? It's basically you give them a requirement and say, hey, build it however you want, and just tell me, you make all the decisions, you decide everything else, and just let me know when it can be done and how it can be done, right? Now, the other extreme is typically if you are very technical yourself, right? So if you're super technical, a lot of engineers will, I mean, not a lot of engineers, sometimes I've heard in some situations, which is very rare by the way, where, and this happens, I think, more in certain very old, big, fat companies where, it's a rotten system. But they'll expect you to spoon feed the engineers, tell them exactly everything that they're supposed to do. So you're going to have to tell them actually how to code the things that you want to get coded, right? The things you want to get programmed. So you'll tell them which language to use, how to structure the program, how to write the different functions, which functions you want. So you're kind of giving them pseudocode, which means you aren't writing code for them, but pretty much so. Like you're pretty much laying down the whole plan for them on how they will write code and what they will do and what they won't do, right? So you're taking away all the creativity and all the decision making from the engineer side and treating them as a keyboard monkey that they're going to just type, type, type and put into flesh whatever you've already drawn on paper, right? That's the other extreme where it's super micromanagement. Okay. By the way, I'm sorry. I'm like, when I'm teaching, typically, I tend to be slow and gradual, and I talk a lot, right? So I'm not super concise with my sentences, right? Um, but whatever. Now, so this is one end where you're super hands off, right? That's the user stories part. I mean, you give the user stories and you're done. And this is the super micromanagement side, right? Where you tell them, oh, here's exactly how you'll do things. Now, unfortunately, in practical terms, there is no perfect middle ground. Okay, so it's not like there's a perfect way to balance the two, or where you fit in the middle. Okay, because every company is different, every engineer is different, every manager is different. So it's not like there's a fine line between. I mean, it's not like there's a rough or even a fine line between helping and influencing versus micromanaging, right? But here's but there's definitely but I believe so the range of oversight that I'm going to talk about now is a good yardstick for from your perspective how much you should influence them, right? So you want to go from here to here, right, towards this direction, and but you don't want to go all the way um, to the end. Like that's a no go. Like do not go here, and also do not just leave it at here, right? So what do? The next level after you've given them user stories, right? So we're slowly moving from the left to the towards the right. The next level after you've given them user stories is to ask them how they're going to build it. So the high level functional blocks of the system. Okay, so I will call it functional blocks and high level system architecture. Now, what this means is instead of giving them the user stories, you go one step further. You're like, okay, here are all the user stories, and now this is how the system will be set up. So, for example, you're like, doing this. Let me use a yellow color. Let me use purple. Huh, yeah. Let's say you tell them, okay, that this is you build this, and then this is the flow chart. You know, uh, this is like whatever. Like you do something, like certain things, or like you give them some overview of how you want the system to look, how you want to split up the different functions or functional blocks of the system. And I won't go into detail here in this video about what functional blocks are and how to actually do them properly. That's a good for another live stream, which I'll try to do later this week or next week. But high level system architecture, like, so you do need certain technical um, fluency to be able to do this, but you can draw the line like, hey, I want the payment system and the order taking. Let's say you're building an e-commerce or like e-commerce system, or a let's say you're Airbnb, right? And you need to build a booking system, like people need to book and then pay, right? So one high level decision would be like, hey, I want the payment system to be completely abstracted and separate from the ordering system, the order booking system, and the accounting system, right? So I mean, it's possible to put the order, the payments, and the order taking and the accounting all under one block, right? Where they're kind of all meshed together and a mess, right? It's like a spaghetti code. So it is possible. So you could say, oh no, I want the payment processing, and even within the payment processing, I want the let's say the bill generation, that to be one functional block that that can be given to an engineer, and then I want the payment processing and the order booking and the reservation, then the cancellations to all be separate pieces. Let's say completely separate blocks within the system, right? So that's like, those are like functional blocks in as an overview. So you could give the engineers that, and of course you'll collaborate with them. Like, hey, this is the functional architecture that I think makes sense. What do you think? What are your thoughts? Why would you do this versus do that? But you still own the final say. Like, they don't push a functional architecture, a high level functional architecture, without getting your green signal on it, right? That's what I mean by that's where I'm going with this particular side. Like, that's the first big step to having more influence than just giving them user stories, right? Now, so that's the high level functional architecture, right? Where you're just giving them high. Okay, never mind. I'm not gonna keep repeating myself. So the next thing after this is where you start to approach the danger zone, or the micromanagement zone, right? And which is why I'm going to put this next level on the other side, right? To make this crude, like, so that I don't want to make this super fine tuned so that you get more confused. I'm just going to make this very simple to remember, right? Now the other stuff is how to do it structurally. Let me say structural blocks. Okay. And this follows under system design. Okay. Now, what do I mean by structural blocks in system design? Now, the functional blocks are about, okay, the system needs to do this and this separately, and this will happen then, and that will happen then, okay? Now, structural blocks means you decide the inputs and outputs to each block. Let's say you say, oh, I'm going to use purple again. Oh, I want this little, microservice or, service or some, and then it inputs that to the database, and you say exactly, what it's going to input to the database, and then the database this kind of request, or actually I'm just mumbling to myself in a way, but oh, and then I want the front end to exchange this data, and then this to happen, that, so you're, instead of saying on the functional side, like, okay, I want this payment system, and then the order taking system to be separate, and I want the payment system to do its job first, and then the order system to do its job. Or actually, it's actually the opposite. Like, you want to take the order management system and then the payments and whatnot, and then I want the the accounting system or something. Like, it's more high level. But here you're getting into the nitty gritty. You're not telling them how to code things, but you're telling them the inputs and outputs. So you're kind of getting into the structure and the design of the system. Like, architecture is, that's the difference between architecture and design. Design means how it will actually be implemented, not just how it works conceptually, right? Architecture is more about how it works on a conceptual basis. Design, it means how it's going to be implemented, right? And so if you are making decisions about the structural blocks and the system design, then you're kind of getting into the zone where you are telling engineers what to do, right? And so that's a lot of influence. And that's kind of micromanaging. It would, if anybody is a good engineer, a skilled engineer, they would probably be, pretty unhappy if you try to ask, if you try to be say like, oh, the system design doesn't get approved unless I give it a green light, right? But however, okay, so this is this is kind of the range of oversight first, right? So to summarize, the first minimum level is user stories. The next level is you decide on functional blocks. Beyond that, you decide on structural blocks and system design. And beyond that, you want to be really micromanaging. You get to pseudocode, right? And this is definitely the safest zone. Like, you always want to have influence on the high level functional blocks and high level system architecture, because that's a techno business decision. That's not exactly a techno decision, right? A technology decision. And so it behooves you to have to put your foot down and say that, yeah, this does not get approved unless unless I'm okay with it. Like, I need to sign off, I need to push the green light, I need to understand exactly why you've architected the system this way, um, right? And I'm going to make the final call on this, right? However, and this is the interesting part, right? You don't want to stay just here. You want to, the sweet spot, right, if there is any, belongs to this space where you make decisions on this side, right? But you let them decide on the structural blocks. However, you ask them to explain to you the structural blocks that they've, and the system design that they've made. Okay, so here's what I mean. You put your foot down on the functional blocks, the system architecture, and then instead of putting your foot down on the structural blocks, you just say, "Oh, all I care about is, can you explain to me how the system design works and why, and the way what decisions you made, and I'll respect your decision. But just so it makes sense to me, could you please explain this? Can you please explain how this is designed? How is the data flowing in the system and whatnot?" So of course, again, you need a lot of technical fluency for this. Shameless plug. That's what we do. Like, that's what my company does. We teach people how to be technically fluent if they're non-technical. But anyway, it doesn't matter how you build that technical fluency, but assuming that you are willing to invest in that journey for yourself, this is the end goal. That's why I'm talking about this, right? um, So again, you put your foot down on the functional blocks, and then you show curiosity and inquisitiveness about the structural blocks, about the system design, right? So you get the both, I wouldn't say the best of both worlds, but as a non-technical person, I'm assuming you are, this gives you a good balance of have making sure that you understand what's going on, making sure the engineers are doing things that are in line with your business vision and your product vision, without putting a lid on their creativity, without really suffocating them or micromanaging them or making them feel like they have to answer to you about every single decision they're making, right? So you just show a genuine curiosity to ask them to explain to you the structural blocks and the system design, but you don't just let them let them make the decision. But for the functional blocks, you do it yourself, right? You kind of push the decision that the functional blocks have to be structured this way. Now, how you come up with functional blocks is more of an art, which I will cover in a future live stream. So you should probably sign up or subscribe or whatever. Like, I don't know how you leave a comment maybe, right? About, so that you can stay in touch and so that you can get notified whenever the video comes up. So yeah, that was the range of oversight concept about how do you influence engineers as a non-techie. Influence. So asking questions is an excellent way of building influence, right? If somebody is explaining to you how their thing works, they are allowing you to influence them, to influence their decision making, right? So this conversation about the structural blocks, where you're listening and trying to understand it and asking them good questions to clarify your thinking, that conversation is going to help you build a lot of influence over engineers and actually impact the system design much more than if you said, "Oh, I'm a non-techie, but like you're gonna do what I say," or you don't. It helps you not pretend, and also helps and staying on the functional blocks level also helps you make sure that what you get from the engineers at the end of the project is going to be something that fits in with your long-term vision, right? I've heard of plenty of companies which where they told the engineers with some user stories that they want them to build, and then you know the engineer builds something, they make their own decisions about a lot of things that are non-trivial decisions, and then let's say 1 year later the system is like, oh, if you want to make that change, you'll have to build it from scratch because we really messed up. Like, we would have to clean up the whole code and basically burn the whole thing down and do it again because it's not scalable beyond a certain point, or it's not flexible beyond a certain point. You're making that change is like $1 million project, right? You want to avoid that. So yeah, I'm probably going on and rambling now, and repeating stuff I've already said. Hopefully this makes sense. If I glossed over certain details that didn't make sense to you, then please leave a comment. Yeah, and ask me any questions if you have so. And yeah, finally, again, a shameless plug. My company, we have a training program for non-technical executives and entrepreneurs, if that describes you, and even for teams, right? I've taught product managers, I've taught executives in the gold mining industry. I've taught CEOs of SaaS companies. I've taught CEOs of tech startups, platform companies. I've kind of been all over the place. So if you have if you would like to build your technical fluency, learn how to design systems, architect systems, manage engineers, make those critical long-term techno business decisions, then feel free to check out the link below, and see you in the next lecture, right? So have a nice day, have a nice evening, whatever, and keep learning, right? Keep getting better. If you're a manager or an entrepreneur or whatever, it's your job to keep getting better at your job, right? So keep learning, and good luck with your journey. All right, I'll stop talking.